She came into his life wrapped in a towel, a tiny gray bundle with tufted ears, wide searching eyes, and a heart still aching for the mother she'd lost. She didn't understand who he was or what he wanted, but the moment he spoke softly, calmly, almost in a whisper, her gaze softened just a little, like the fear was starting to lift. She was a fragile, wild child who had lost everything she'd ever known, and now it was up to him to help her believe in the world again. Mark, a Colorado wildlife rehabilitator, had raised owls, hawks, and foxes, but never a bobcat this small, this delicate, this utterly dependent. What followed wasn't just a rescue. It was a bond forged through sleepless nights, whispered words, and a battle against death itself. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. She came into his life wrapped in a towel, a tiny gray bundle with tufted ears, wide searching eyes, and a heart still aching for the mother she'd lost. The wildlife officer carried her in like something made of glass. The July heat pressed against the screen door, and the sound of cicadas buzzed over the hush that fell across the little rehab house at the edge of the Colorado foothills. "Found her on a ranch road," the officer said quietly. "Mother was hit by a truck. She was hiding in the culvert, crying. Rancher called us. Thought you might be able to give her a shot." He eased the towel-wrapped bundle into the man's arms. For a second, the baby bobcat went rigid, all instinct and terror. Her tiny claws flexed through the fabric, and a faint, raspy cry escaped her. The man, everyone just called him Mark around here, though the state knew him as a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, brought her closer to his chest. He didn't stroke her yet. He didn't crowd her. He just let her feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, voice low and calm, almost a whisper. "You're okay now, you're safe. Nobody's gonna hurt you here." She didn't understand who he was or what he wanted, but as he spoke, her gaze shifted up toward his face, pupils wide and wild and searching. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened. Just a fraction, like a knot that had been pulled too tight. "Oh, I don't think you should be getting out of that basket," he added softly when he felt her squirm. One corner of his mouth twitched into a smile. That was the moment he knew this wasn't just a baby bobcat. This was a fragile wild child who had just lost everything she had ever known. A den. A mother's warmth. The steady heartbeat she'd pressed her cheek against every night. And now it was up to him to help her believe in the world again. When they brought her into the rehab room, Mark was just as scared as she was, though he'd never have admitted it out loud. He'd raised owls and hawks, raccoons and fawns, even a fox once. But a bobcat kitten this small? That was new, even for him. She had barely left her mother's den, and suddenly she was surrounded by strange voices, antiseptic smells, and the soft clink of stainless steel bowls. Outside the open window, the evening breeze carried the scent of pine and dust and the distant highway. Inside, the only sound was her trembling breath. At first, she shivered constantly, burying herself deeper into the towel like she was trying to crawl back into a world that no longer existed. "You little girl," he whispered, careful to keep his distance. He didn't reach for her face or force her to look at him. Instead, he set the basket down on a padded table, pulled up a stool, and simply sat beside her. He rested his hand on the edge of the blanket where she could see it if she chose to, but not close enough to trap her. And then he did what he always did with the frightened ones. He talked. He told her where she was, told her his name, told her that he worked with the state, that he'd helped many wild animals grow strong and go home again. He told her that her own mother would have fought for her, and that now it was his turn to fight for her. And he told her her name. Zir, he said softly. That's you. Strong name for a strong girl. It means you're going to make it. By the next day, the trembling had eased. She still flattened her ears when he entered the room, still pressed herself against the corner of the basket, but she no longer cried the whole time. A week later, she looked him in the eyes for the first time. He had just finished a feeding and was wiping a bit of formula from her chin when she froze, her gaze locking onto his. Her whiskers twitched. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. All right, he murmured. There you are. She blinked once, slowly. Something in the room changed. A few days after that came the moment he would never forget. He had wrapped her in a clean towel after a weighing and held her against his shoulder so she could listen to his heartbeat. It was part of the routine now. Feed, burp, warm, settle. Her tiny body, no bigger than a large house cat, but all sinewy bobcat promise, sagged against him. Then, without a sound, she shifted, pressed the side of her face into his collarbone, and let her head rest fully on his shoulder. 30 seconds later, she was asleep. Zir was like an infant. The first few weeks passed in a haze of bottles and alarms. She would wake up in the night crying for milk, making this sound somewhere between a squeak and a rasping little grunt, a sound that somehow managed to be both fierce and helpless. 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, it didn't matter. When hunger struck, she demanded the world's full attention. Mark kept a small cot in the rehab room and a thermos of hot water by the sink. More than once, his wife, Sarah, found him sitting on the edge of the cot in the half-dark, shoulders slumped with fatigue but eyes gentle, a tiny bobcat cradled against his chest. You know normal people our age get puppies, she teased one night, leaning in the doorway in her robe. Normal people don't file state paperwork for their hobbies. He shot back with a tired smile. She came over and touched Zir's paw with the back of her finger. Zir's ears flicked, but she didn't pull away. Her belly was full, her world warm, and for now, that was enough. Any regrets? Sarah asked quietly. He shook his head. Not a one. Even though it was exhausting, deep down, he knew it was something close to magic. She trusted him. In the wild, trust could get an animal killed. Here, in this small house tucked against the rising slope of the Rockies, trust was the difference between life and death. He never forgot, though, that this trust had to be handled carefully. She was not a pet, not a curiosity. Every bottle, every gentle word, every quiet moment together had to build her toward the future she was meant for, a wild future. He worked closely with the state biologist, shared her weight charts, her developmental milestones. They agreed on a plan. Bottle feeding until she was strong enough. Gradual introduction to a larger, more naturalistic enclosure in the backyard. Minimal exposure to visitors. She needs to know humans aren't the answer to everything, the biologist reminded him over the phone. I know, he said, even as Zir, hearing his voice, turned her head toward him from the crate where she was dozing. He knew, and it broke his heart a little more every day. Every day she grew braver. First, she wobbled across the padded floor, tripping over her own oversized paws. Her tail, just a little stubby bob with a black tip, twitched as she concentrated, ears pitched forward like tiny radar dishes. Then she began hopping. From the base of the scratching post to the edge of the cot. From the cot to the low stool. From the stool to his lap. She loved hiding behind his back, curling into a tight little ball between him and the pillow, convinced she had discovered a secret den that no human could possibly know about. "Where's Zier?" Sarah would ask. He'd widen his eyes theatrically. "No idea. Must have grown wings and flown off." From behind his back came the faintest chuffing sound, almost like laughter. Her favorite thing of all, though, was getting her tiny claws trimmed. Most wild youngsters fought nail trims. Kittens and raccoons squirmed. Fox kits twisted like coiled springs. Zier, on the other hand, would melt into a puddle of pure contentment the moment he gently held her paw and clipped the transparent tips of each claw. He sat on the floor with her in his lap, her body draped sideways, chin propped against his thigh. One paw at a time. Snip, snip. Her eyes would drift half shut, the muscles in her shoulders softening, a soft rumble building in her chest. Not quite a house cat purr, but close. "If the public could see you now, we'd never hear the end of it," Sarah said one afternoon, leaning on the doorframe with a mug of coffee. "Which is exactly why they're not going to," he replied. As she grew older, Zier turned into a curious explorer. He started calling her the Scout because no room, no corner, no forgotten box in the rehab building went unnoticed. One day, he carried in groceries after a trip to town and set the bags on the kitchen floor for a moment. When he turned back, he froze. Zier had her head buried in one of the paper bags, her hindquarters sticking straight out, tail flicking with intense concentration. "Hey now," he warned, amused but on guard. "Nothing in there is on the approved Bobcat menu." She backed out triumphantly, not with meat or cheese in her mouth, but with a banana. She trotted across the floor like a queen parading a trophy. "You don't even eat those," Sarah laughed. Zier didn't attempt to. She simply carried the banana everywhere for the rest of the afternoon, gently clamped in her jaws. When she finally tired of it, she tucked it carefully into a folded blanket as if hiding treasure. Banana claimed, dignity intact. She also loved discovering new dens. Old towels stacked in the laundry basket, the space under the bottom shelf in the supply room, the cardboard box that had once held exam gloves. She wriggled into them all, testing each for softness, safety, and the all-important element of stealth. Sometimes, when he couldn't find her right away, Mark would stop, close his eyes, and listen. There it would be, the faint scrape of claws against cardboard, the whisper of fabric as she turned in place, the soft exhale of a wild thing at peace. For all the sweetness, though, there were hard days. Around the time Zier should have been fully weaned, she developed a fever. Her ears, usually cool and silky, burned against his fingertips. She refused her bottle, curled into herself, eyes dull. He called the vet, a seasoned woman named Dr. Miller who had spent 3 decades patching up everything from ranch horses to bald eagles. "She's fighting something," Dr. Miller said after a thorough exam, her lined face serious. "Could be a virus, could be stress. We're going to start fluids and antibiotics, but I'll be honest with you, Mark. She's small. She's had a rough start. We don't have a lot of margin." He nodded, unable to trust his voice. That night, as a storm rolled over the foothills and rain hammered the roof, he sat on the floor beside her crate. The IV bag hung from a makeshift hanger he'd rigged from an old broom handle and duct tape. The soft beep of a portable monitor filled the room. Zir lay on the blankets, sides rising and falling too quickly. "You keep fighting," he whispered. "You hear me? I know you're tired. I know this isn't fair, but your mom didn't get a chance. You still do. You hang in there and I'll do the rest." She didn't move, didn't open her eyes. But when he slipped his hand through the bars and let it rest near her paw, he felt the faintest brush of fur against his skin as her toes flexed. It was enough. For 3 days and 3 nights, they danced on the edge. He slept in stolen snatches, chin on his chest, waking every hour to check the drip, to take her temperature, to coax a few drops of electrolyte solution past her lips with a syringe. On the 4th morning, he walked into the rehab room with a mug of coffee and stopped so abruptly that some sloshed over the rim. Zir was sitting up. Her head wobbled a little and her fur stuck up in odd directions, but her eyes were clear. She saw him, and her ears tilted forward. Then, in a gesture so ordinary it almost broke him, she reached out with one paw and tapped the side of the crate where he usually set her bottle. "Hungry, huh?" he choked. She blinked slowly. He laughed then, a short, shaky sound that made Sarah appear in the doorway. "She turned the corner," he said simply. They both understood what that meant. The months that followed were a study in controlled distance. As Zir grew stronger and longer-legged, he began the careful work of moving her world from the comfort of the rehab room to the rougher, truer textures of the outside enclosure. The enclosure sat against the back slope, shaded by scrub oak and ponderosa pine. It was tall enough for climbing logs and broad enough for a quick burst of speed. Natural branches, platforms at different heights, rocks warmed by the sun. It was as close to wild as they could safely provide. The first day he carried her outside, cradled against his chest, she froze as the wind hit her face. So many smells. Pine sap and dust, sun-warmed dirt, the faint musk of deer that moved through at night, the dry sweetness of hay from a neighboring ranch. He set her down just inside the enclosure, then stepped back, closing the gate behind him but staying inside. For a long time, she didn't move. Then her nose twitched. One paw lifted, sat down. She ventured forward, each step measured, the muscles along her back rippling with contained energy. She stopped at the base of a climbing log and looked up, then over her shoulder at him. "You can," he said quietly. "That's what you were built for." She launched herself upward. Her climb was not graceful at first. She slipped once, claws scrabbling for purchase. But she righted herself, found a groove in the bark, and pushed on. When she reached the first platform and turned, she seemed taller, older, as if the act of climbing had awakened something ancient in her bones. After that day, her time in the indoor room grew shorter. Feedings became less hands-on and more, "Here is your food," placed at a distance. Human voices became quieter, briefer. No more playing with banana trophies, no more hiding behind his back. He missed it all fiercely. But every time he watched her stalk a fluttering leaf with single-minded focus, or pounce on a tossed bit of fur as if it were a mouse, he felt that same quiet peace. She was becoming what she was meant to be. No matter how cozy their life together was, he always knew the day would come when she'd have to leave. Bobcats are wild by nature. They belong outside, where the creeks cut through the ravines and the rabbits hide in the brambles, and the stars are not softened by porch lights. The state biologist visited one cool October morning, hands in her jacket pockets, breath puffing in small clouds. "She looks good," the biologist said, watching Zier move along the top of the highest platform, tail flicking. "Too good," Mark admitted. They went over the checklist: age, health, weight, hunting behaviors, wariness of humans. Zier passed each with cautious approval. "I won't lie to you," the biologist said as they leaned on the fence. "It's always a gamble. Some make it, some don't. But if we keep her here because we're scared, then what have we really done for her?" He nodded, jaw tight. The release date was set for the following week. In the days leading up to it, he found himself lingering longer than necessary by the enclosure. Zier watched him from the shadows, eyes gleaming. No longer the trembling bundle in a towel, but a sleek young bobcat with powerful shoulders and a coat dappled in gold and gray. "Big day coming, kid," he said quietly one evening as the sun slid behind the ridge and the sky turned the color of old pennies. She tilted her head, ears flicking. Maybe she understood. Maybe she didn't. But when he turned to go, she paced along the fence until he disappeared around the corner, as if seeing him off. Release day broke cold and clear. They chose a spot several miles from the house, on land managed in partnership with the state. A patchwork of meadows and forest, with a creek that stayed open even in winter. Plenty of cover, plenty of prey, minimal human disturbance. He drove the truck while Sarah sat beside him, one hand resting on the covered crate behind their seats. "Remember when she was smaller than a house slipper?" she said softly. He smiled without taking his eyes off the dirt road. "She still thinks she is when she tries to fit in those little boxes." At the release site, they parked beneath a stand of pines. The air smelled of frost and damp earth. A jay scolded them from a nearby branch. The biologist met them there, clipboard under her arm. "Well," she said, exhaling, "let's give this girl her second chance." They set the crate on the ground facing the tree line. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mark knelt, rested his hand lightly on the top of the crate, and took a slow breath. "Zier," he said, "you remember the road that brought you to me? This is the one that takes you home." He didn't make a speech. Wild animals did not need speeches. They needed clear paths and open doors. His fingers found the latch. The door swung open. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then a paw appeared, flexing in the cold air. Another followed. Zier's head emerged, ears high, nose working furiously. She stepped out slowly, body low to the ground, every muscle thrumming. She did not look back. She moved toward the tree line in a series of cautious, fluid steps. Halfway there, a breeze lifted, bringing with it the scent of water and earth and distant deer. Her posture changed. She lengthened her stride, body dropping into the easy, rolling gait of a predator at home in its body. At the edge of the trees, she paused. For one impossible moment, Mark could have sworn she glanced sideways, not quite at him, not quite away. Just a small acknowledgement of the journey between basket and forest. Then she was gone. The brush shivered once, twice, stilled. He remained kneeling long after the others had turned back toward the truck. "You okay?" Sarah asked gently. He nodded, staring at the tree line. "Yeah," he said. "This is the part I signed up for." His voice wobbled anyway. After that, life settled into its familiar rhythm. There were always more animals. Injured hawks brought in by farmers, raccoons orphaned on the highway shoulder, a fox with a snare wound, a fawn whose mother had been struck by lightning in a summer storm. He gave each his best, knowing that some would stay only a few hours, others many months. Each had a story, each left a mark. But there were evenings when the house felt too quiet, when he'd find himself glancing at the back fence, half expecting to see a certain golden gray shape perched there, banana in mouth, looking deeply pleased with herself. "She's out there," Sarah reminded him one night as they sat on the porch, mugs of tea warming their hands. Hunting, climbing, stalking shadows, doing everything she was meant to do. "I know," he said. He did know. But knowing didn't erase the ache. Then, little by little, something began to happen. It started with a shape at the edge of the clearing. He was stacking firewood behind the rehab building when he felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. Not the casual curiosity of a neighbor, not the bold stare of a deer, but something quieter, sharper. He straightened slowly, turned toward the tree line. There, half hidden among the scrub, stood a bobcat. Her coat was a shade darker now, winter fur thickened against the coming cold. Her ears were forward, tail tip twitching. She didn't move. Neither did he. The distance between them was too far for details, but the way she held herself, the particular tilt of her head, it was like recognizing an old song from the first note. "Zir," he whispered. As if she heard, her ears flicked. She stood there for 3 long breaths, eyes steady. Then, without a sound, she turned and slipped back into the trees. After that, he began to see her now and then. Sometimes, at dusk, she would appear at the far corner of the field, a silent silhouette against the fading light. She never came close, never approached the fence. She only stood, watching the house, the yard, the place where she had learned to climb and hunt and trust. "You two seem okay," he imagined her thinking. "I'll be back in a week." Each time he saw her, he felt that mix of emotions again. A little sadness, because he missed the days when her paws were small enough to fit in his hand and her world fit inside a towel. But also peace, because he had never wanted her to stay forever. He had wanted her to live a real bobcat life. One spring evening, just as the last snow was melting from the north-facing slopes, he was out by the fence repairing a section that a winter windstorm had pushed sideways. The air smelled of thawing earth and wet pine. A chorus of frogs had begun down by the creek. He hammered the last nail into place, wiped his hands on his jeans, and turned toward the house. Something moved at the edge of his vision. He looked up. There, at the very edge of the clearing, stood Zir. And she wasn't alone. Beside her, half hidden by the grass, 2 smaller shapes wobbled and bumped into each other. Their spots were darker, their heads too big for their bodies, ears comically large. One tripped over its own paws and tumbled, then sprang up again with indignation. Bobcat kittens. His breath caught. Zir stood tall and alert, body positioned slightly in front of the youngsters. Her head was high, but her gaze was steady, not frantic. She watched him as the kittens explored a few cautious steps, then darted back to her legs. For a long, suspended moment, neither moved. The wind carried her scent to him, the wild tang of fur and forest and creek water. It carried his to her, the soap from his hands, the faint smell of gasoline from the chainsaw he'd used earlier. the old familiar blend of human and home. He didn't speak. Words felt too small, too clumsy. But in his chest, something loosened. There she was, a wild mother, alive, strong, raising her own young in the world she was born for. Zir gave a small flick of her tail, the bobcat version of a nod. Then she turned, nudged one of the kittens gently with her nose, and led them back toward the tree line. The kittens followed, feet tangling, stopping to sniff at every new scent, then darting to catch up. At the edge of the forest, Zir paused once more and looked back over her shoulder. Their eyes met one last time. Then the woods swallowed them. He stood there until the frogs were the only sound left. Sarah found him there later, hands braced on the fence, eyes bright. "She came back," he said, voice rough with emotion. "She brought her family." Sarah's hand found his. "Well," she said softly, "looks like your girl did all right." In the years that followed, Mark never tried to track Zir. He didn't set out cameras to follow her every move. The land was hers now, not his story to write. But on certain evenings, when the wind was just right and the sky glowed orange over the ridge, he would step out onto the porch and feel that old, familiar sensation. The sense that eyes watched from the shadows, not with hunger, not with fear, but with quiet recognition. Sometimes, if he looked toward the tree line at just the right moment, he would catch a hint of movement, a shadow sliding between the trunks, a flash of tufted ears, a bobbed tail disappearing into the brush. And in those moments, he felt no sadness at all, only gratitude for a tiny gray bundle wrapped in a towel, for the nights of sleepless feedings and the days of clumsy hops and banana heists, for the fever that broke and the first climb up the rough-barked log, for the truck ride to the forest and the courage it took to open the crate door, for the wild life that followed, and for the quiet, steadfast bond that somehow stretched between a little rehab house at the edge of the Colorado foothills and the hidden paths where a bobcat moved like a whisper. Sometimes, when the frogs sang loud and the stars came out sharp and bright, he would stand on the porch and speak into the dark. "Be safe out there, Zir," he would say. "You did good, girl." Somewhere beyond the tree line, a twig would snap, a shadow would shift. And though he knew she was long gone into her own world, he liked to imagine that just for a heartbeat, a wild mother paused, lifted her head, and remembered the human who had been her family when she had none. Before anyone takes in a wild or exotic animal, Mark always tells them the same thing now when they call the rehab center. "Talk to your state wildlife agency and a licensed rehabilitator first," he says. "These animals aren't meant to be pets. They need specialized care, proper permits, and most of all, a chance to go back where they belong." He knows better than most that love alone isn't enough. But he also knows that when love is paired with responsibility, knowledge, and respect for the wild, something extraordinary can happen. A wild baby bobcat can lose her mother, find a human who becomes her family, and then, in the end, find her way home again.